Hey, I'm Angelo Pinto, and welcome to Let It Rip. We're coming to you from the CUNY TV studios in the shadow of the Empire State Building in New York City. Let's not sugarcoat it. America is in a state of emergency, and the alarms are going off everywhere. This is all happening under the backdrop of mass deportations of over 200,000 people by ICE since Trump has taken office. Recently in New York City, more than 13 elected officials were arrested by the feds at an immigration court sit-in in Lower Manhattan after demanding access to the holding cells and being forcefully denied entry by DHS. And to make matters worse, the economy is showing cracks. With an uptick in unemployment, and not surprisingly, the black community is being hit the worst. There have been over 300,000 black women laid off or pushed out of the workforce in the last few months. So with HBCUs on lockdown due to racial threats, National Guard rolling down local streets in DC like it's wartime, and white nationalists storming the streets screaming, "White men fight back," Let It Rip is not here to back down, but to talk the talk and step up. Joining us is co-founder of Until Freedom, Tamika Mallory, and New York City Public Advocate, Jumaane Williams. I'm Angelo Pinto, and this is Let It Rip. So you were recently arrested in Lower Manhattan as a result of advocating on behalf of ICE detention, really just trying to see what was taking place at this facility. What is the status of things? How are you feeling given the recent arrest of yourself and 12 other elected officials, and not just New York City, but the climate across the country?
Well, you know, shout out to that college who were there and everyday New Yorker who was there as well. There was about 70 arrests, New Yorkers who said we got to do something, and the organizations who helped put that together. So, you know, we were split, and shout out to Comptroller Brad Lander, who had a contingent who were actually on the 10th floor, who were trying to see what was going on in there. They were arrested. And then we had a contingent that was outside blocking the garage of which they usually take people out of. We were concerned they would try to get some folks out, knowing that.
So a very organized effort.
It was really organized effort. I'm very proud to have been a part of it. We were arrested by PD. I think they made a decision. My colleagues who were upstairs were arrested by the federal government. And so everybody has some court cases that need to attend to in the coming weeks. My thing is just reminding folks, you know, we often read about these times in history books, and there are names that we know, but there's tens of thousands of names we will never know that made it successful because they participated in any way that they could. And we need that right now. And so, you know, I think it's about doing what you can with what you have where you are. We do have a judge that agreed that this is inhumane conditions. Also agreed that it's illegal conditions and the way that people are being housed there. We have to remember to rehumanize people who are staying in this filth, who are coming out of those buildings, having no idea where they're going, being deported to countries they're not even from, right. And being duped into coming there. Reminding folks, this is nothing to do about criminality at all. Many of these folks are following the legal process for asylum and being duped and kidnapped.
And do you think the arrest of elected officials sends a different message, even though the judge is saying these conditions are deplorable? What did the arrest message send? And of course, we've seen this in other cities. We saw Baraka in Newark being arrested as a result of some kind of collusion with ICE. What kind of message does that send? Do you think it deters elected officials from doing this? Mm-hmm. And what does it mean to target elected officials in this way, in this particular moment?
I think, one, you can't comply in advance. You just can't comply in advance, and you have to push back. And we have tools in the toolkit to do that. Civil disobedience, you know, is a tried and true tool in this country in particular, but around the globe, of pushing back on things that are happening that are immoral, that are oftentimes even illegal, that are happening. And so the arrests, one, they do help, particularly if it's a civil disobedience, they do help keep this conversation going, keep people remembering that something is happening there. I think targeting elected officials like the way they did Ross Barack and others, and particularly Brad Lander, even on his first arrest, really sends a message that they mean business. And I'm hoping it does the opposite. I'm hoping it inspires folks.
To step up to the plate and do more.
And so you had 2 out of 3 citywide elected officials participate. Maybe at some point we'll get
we'll
the third
see
one.
more. Mm-hmm. And we're going to go back to this, the role of elected officials in this moment. Should they be doing something different? Should they be doing more? How do you get more elected officials engaged? But what does this mean across the country? Of course, you have the implications of ICE on Black and brown communities, whether or not they're constantly living in a state of fear, but also this idea of being in a constant state of emergency. How do we respond to that? Do you think this moment puts people further into their homes, further into seclusion, and prevents us from getting on the ground in the way we need to respond to this moment?
I mean, I think that authoritarianism and fascism is designed to silence communities, to silence people, and to silence particularly dissent. That is what we see happening in many ways across the country. And of course, we watched not just Jimmy Kimmel be terminated or suspended, if you will, but there was also a Black woman from the Washington Post, Karen Attiah, who was also fired from her job just for posting the words of a man who is now being hailed as the greatest American ever. And the words were absolutely very offensive and racist towards Black women. And so I think, yes, we are in a moment where some people will feel that the fear will cripple them to go into their homes, to get deeper into feeling paralyzed and being unable to move. But what I do know is that there is another side of that, that the more we begin to see this sort of onslaught on our communities, you're going to see more people waking up and beginning to come to the window and say something is going on out there and I don't like it and it's time for me to get involved. And we have to provide space for them to be able to do that in different ways. Some folks will protest. The No Kings movement has been incredible, but then there are going to be some people who are going to say, let me donate to support from whatever way I can financially. There will be other people, and particularly attorneys, who will help to sue these agencies, to sue the federal government and say this has to be stopped and hope that the courts will support us. And we have to make sure that there is an open door for people to have entry points to this movement. Certainly.
And all of these things, or many of these things, when you talk about ICE arresting elected officials, of course, tearing communities apart, this is all political violence, right? And mass, widespread political violence. And now, in the shadow of all of this, you have the assassination of Charlie Kirk, which folks are also saying is political violence against them. What does that mean? Because in many ways, we're in a moment where it appears that white nationalists and others have been emboldened by this moment and are going to get more fuel to their fire, and others are being attacked, targeted, arrested, and communities being torn apart. What does that mean for this moment? Do you think the murder of Charlie Kirk creates an atmosphere where white nationalism can thrive more and other communities will not? How do we navigate all these pieces?
First, the context of the moment is also important to me, and I want us to make sure we learn lessons. So I do want to say that, and I've been saying this in different spaces, one of the reasons that we're here is because people who shouldn't have drank the orange Kool-Aid last year.
And this sense of voting for Donald Trump and making him the president of the United States again.
Or staying home thinking that nothing's going to be any different. And so when you drink that Kool-Aid, particularly if that Kool-Aid allows you to say it's only going to be other people or it's going to be people I don't like anyway, then we get to these moments. And I'm really hoping after we get out of this, through the Most High, through our ancestors pushing us and our helpfully doing the action, we learn the lesson. This is like a cycle we keep seeing going over. It never just happens.
Now, do you think the Democratic Party should be learning something from that moment too? Of course they should. Because there are folks who feel like, their approach, maybe even the candidate, the timing in which the candidate was placed may not have been the timing to secure a victory.
I don't know how long we don't have the time for all of this, right? But every decision our leaders have made, including the Democratic Party, has brought us Donald Trump. So they have to own that and figure out how do we change it. Now, in 2008, people who never voted for, probably don't own a black toothbrush, voted for Barack Obama. They also voted for Donald Trump. People in New York City voted for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Donald Trump. They have been saying that we don't want the same messenger and the same message. The party I belong to has been sending the same messenger and the same message to protect the incumbents' protection and to protect their own millionaires and billionaires. And refusing to adopt the message that they said should be theirs. The fact that you allow millionaires, billionaires to adopt an affordability message is crazy to me. That's just wild. It makes no sense. And back to the Charlie Kirk moment, to be clear, the political violence needs to be condemned in the harshest way possible.
Across the board.
This man was killed in front of his children and his wife. That is a horror and a trauma that we have to make sure does not happen. America in this moment created Charlie Kirk and the shooter. And we have to contend with those things. And the access to guns always makes things worse. That's the time for another conversation. But I do like that someone pointed out, we should absolutely condemn and make sure that we remember to push that this kind of violence can't happen at all.
Can't happen at all, period.
It also doesn't expunge the way
the things that he said, the rhetoric that he used, and actually the implications of that will live on beyond Charlie Kirk's assassination. How do we kind of put all this stuff into place now, Tamika, when you think about the assassination of Charlie Kirk, whether or not the Democratic Party has actually met this moment, right? Folks will say, of course, the Trump election happened. The Democratic Party didn't meet that moment in a way that secured the kind of victory necessary to say we're not in this predicament. And now that we're here, is the Democratic establishment meeting the moment? And if they're not, how do we encourage, can we get them to meet the moment, or does this signal something else that should happen?
Yeah, well, I want to just go back to Jumaane's, the public advocate's point about Charlie Kirk's family being there to see him being murdered. And it wasn't just his family, which is a crisis. I mean, it is horrific to have his child and his wife to be in that audience, but there were students there as well. And the worst part about it is that social media was also a part of how we now have viewed it, our children, our young children, exactly, millions of people. And so what we don't want is to normalize in any way what happened to Charlie Kirk and what has been happening in terms of gun violence and political violence in general in this country. When you ask the question of whether or not the
Democrats are meeting the moment,
whether or not the Democrats are meeting the moment, and you use the word establishment, there is a severe issue in the Democratic Party where the establishment and other Democrats are clashing, if you will, because there is not, the reckoning is coming, it is happening, to say that the people are rejecting business as usual. They are rejecting the same old talking points and the same old capitulation. Because as Jumaane said, we cannot just accept business as usual here. This is a fight for our freedom, for our lives, and for our children. Our children will look back in this moment and ask us, what did we do? And what did we do differently? And trying to work across the aisle with people who have shown us that they are prepared for tyranny against our communities, and they will protect themselves and their own no matter what they have done to be violent towards us, because I feel that the words that Charlie Kirk said, the things that he stated, were also violent towards me. So that also needs to be a part of this conversation. And I think that the Democratic Party, even in their most recent unanimous vote and at the Senate level, to pass a resolution to give this man a national day of remembrance on the day of George Floyd's birthday. October 14th, imagine how violent that feels towards communities that look like us.
Great conversation. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and when we come back, we'll have an exclusive with the New York Lieutenant Governor, Antonio Delgado. I'm Angelo Pinto, and this is Let It Rip. Welcome back to Let It Rip. The question for many is, how should Democrats be approaching this chaotic and at times violent moment? Some believe Trump's own elevation to the presidency is a slap in the face of the establishment politics, and it's time for Democrats to wake up and fight back. But it appears the Dems have been disheveled and divided on the path forward. In a wild twist of events here in New York, the former running mate of now Governor Kathy Hochul, Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado, has thrown his hat in the race for her seat. Is this what we need, and why? Joining us is New York Lieutenant Governor and gubernatorial candidate Antonio Delgado. Thank you for joining us on Let It Rip. So let's jump right into it. Once a running mate of Kathy Hochul, the now standing governor of New York State, and now you're going to run against her. Why? How did this come about?
Well, I think it's important to recognize the status quo is broken. The establishment, including Governor Hochul, has lacked a vision for a way forward. We don't have any bold, decisive, transformational leadership in this moment. To the extent we have a vision, it's tied to profit, it's tied to power and self-preservation, or it's tied to party. It is not tied.
We need something different?
100%. It's not tied to the people. And the numbers speak for themselves. You know, the largest wealth inequality gap of any state right here in New York. 1 in 5 kids living in poverty, half those kids in deep poverty. A quarter of all New Yorkers, 1 in 4 New Yorkers, can't afford basic necessities, housing, utility bills, groceries, HealthCare, the great blue state of New York. Question remains, when are we actually going to implement policies that are actually about the people? Instead, what we do is give a lot of money away. Corporate giveaways, subsidies, under the umbrella of economic development, and hope it somehow does what? Trickle down.
Now, many will ask that, you know, prior to this moment now where you're saying, hey, listen, there has been some clear failures, which we should talk about, you decided to be a running mate with her. Did you not think that this would be the outcome of her as governor? Some issues not being resolved, and as you said, money going in the wrong places, at least as one of the issues. Did you not see this when you were first considering her or considering being a running mate of Kathy Hochul?
I was a 2-term member of Congress. I ran in upstate New York, the Hudson Valley, Catskills area, became the first person of color to win upstate New York in Congress, a 90% white district, a seat that Trump had won by 7 points in 2016 before I flipped it in 2018. And I got reelected in 2020, outperformed Biden by 10 points, won by 12, and won in counties Trump himself won, in the 8th largest congressional seat in the entire country out of 435. 18 bills signed into law, 10 by Trump, 8 by Biden. So when I stepped into the lieutenant governor position and was asked if I considered being in that role, a month and a half out from the primary of June of 2022, after we had the Brian Benjamin dynamic, which he had to step aside, the governor was the one who was in a pinch. The governor was the one who needed somebody to step into that position with experience, with a strong track record of success, and somebody who could actually be a genuine thought partner. So when I stepped into that position, based on a lot of discussions with the governor, candid ones, the expectation was our dynamic would break the mold. Our dynamic would be a bit different. And it was to understand that I would bring to bear my perspective, my outlook. Someone, by the way, who never took a corporate PAC check when I was in Congress and still haven't done so. So the understanding was there'd be a folding into my outlook, not a dominant point of view per se, she's the governor, but nonetheless an inclusion. That never materialized. And when Trump wins, the game changes at that point because the stakes go incredibly high. And we saw in 2024, the largest swing from left to right in the entire country happened where? Happened right here in New York. And so at that point, you have to ask yourself, are we doing enough? Do we have enough to resist what's coming down the pipeline? And not just fight against Trump, which we know we must do, but what are we fighting for?
And interestingly enough, obviously, you're saying we're not doing enough. And of course, across New York State and around the country, we see ICE deportations. Where do you stand on the issue of ICE? How should New York State be responding? And also, what are the other issues that you would do different? What are the things where you clearly say, hey, listen, the current governor is doing this, I would make a radical shift around this? Where are those areas?
Well, we could just talk about how she has chosen to respond to Trump, and specifically that Republican budget bill. I've called for a special session right now. Bring the folks back right now to Albany and do 2 things. On the economics of the situation, we're going to have a shortfall in the billions because of what just happened. 1.5 million New Yorkers losing HealthCare, losing SNAP, right? Meanwhile, I get to the ICE point, you have the investment in ICE rates. Why can't we bring folks back to Albany and raise revenue on billionaires, the ultra wealthy and big corporations? I've called for that. I think we should push aggressively on that and make sure we have shared sacrifice to meet this moment. The governor is too concerned about those folks, as she put it, moving to Palm Beach, when the vast majority of folks who leave this state make between $30,000 and $60,000 a year, and they're being priced out. Those are the folks we should be focusing on. On the ICE part, why can't we pass New York for All, which I've said I'd support? This would ban 287G agreements where you have local law enforcement being deputized by federal agents to do their bidding at the expense of our fellow New Yorkers. She won't do that. Why not? Because she's scared of the right, and she's scared that she's going to be vilified or deemed soft on immigration. We cannot at this point backpedal or retreat in this moment. You cannot act like a politician in this moment. Act like a moral leader in this moment and demonstrate what you're capable of. That, to me, is what's lacking, and not just in the state of New York, but I argue across the board when it comes to the establishment of this party. We have to be far more aggressive in our moral outlook in this moment.
One of the things you said that's powerful is, at least the way I hear it, is really taking a look at the most vulnerable amongst us. Oftentimes when you hear politicians talk, they might talk about the middle class, but then they're not usually talking about the most vulnerable folks who may be deported by ICE, individuals who can't afford health care or are losing it, or to your point, who are making $30,000 to $60,000 and can barely afford to live, who are just making it, just getting by. What are some of the other policies that you see that are important, critical policies to really speak to the most vulnerable in New York State, and maybe sends a message across the country that this is how governors should be responding to this moment?
I take the 3 or 4 I would focus on. Housing being probably the top issue. Right now in New York, we do tax credits. That's our whole game plan. Let's just give tax credits to rich developers and hope that they build affordable housing.
Which won't happen likely.
Hasn't happened. If it does happen, you get a little carve out, maybe a back entrance, right? That's the way they do it now. Why not actually take that same money and have a statewide rental assistance program, or make it easier for localities across the state to stabilize rent, which we don't do, or have a first-time owner, first-time home buyer grant program statewide. Again, we give all that money away in tax credits, reallocate that money back to the people. If you're a long-term renter, we can help you become an owner, right? These are the things that we're not doing at a scale level here in New York, and we should be doing. Healthcare. When are we going to drive profit out of the healthcare system? How long is it going to take before people understand that we are not paying for healthcare? We are paying for insurance, meaning we are paying to get gamed by a system that is designed to extract profit at your expense.
How viable of an option is this for folks? How do you message this to folks? It's always hard to get an incumbent out of the way, which she is, and has some level of name recognition. How do you do that? And some people may say, are you doing this for political reasons? Are you doing this because of your vision, or are you doing this for personal reasons because things didn't pan out the way you did in aligning with her?
So look, let me answer that second question first, because it relates, I think, to the first one. The easiest thing in the world for me would be to just fall in line, politically.
Stay where you are, do what you've been doing.
Stay in line, fit in, don't rock the boat. The difference is, I didn't get into politics to play politics. I get into politics to make a difference, to have impact. I wanted to be somebody who could join an administration and make an impact. That was the mentality coming into this role. I wanted to be a partner that would actually move this state in a positive and bold direction. That was my focus. I did not know that Trump, first and foremost, would come back into the White House, nor did I know that myself and the governor would drift so far apart over our tenure. But that's the reality of it. And I've chosen, because I can't be in this space and not be my authentic self and not do the work on behalf of the people. Just like I did when I said Biden should step down. When a lot of folks thought that was politically not the smartest thing for anybody to do, I did it. Just like I said when Mayor Adams should resign, when no one said that was the politically smart thing to do, but I did it. No choice have I ever made, well in this position or even before this position, has been politically calculated. It's about, especially now with Trump in the White House, what are you prepared to do by way of your conscience? So I didn't come into this to kiss anybody's ring, to make friends with party bosses or deal with the party hierarchy. I came this because I think people need real leaders in this moment, and I want to be one of those leaders. And ultimately, that's what I think people want. And that's also what sets Trump apart. For as bad as he is, and as destructive as he is not a political person. He's not a politician. He is a chaos agent, but he's uninhibited and he's raw.
I would like to thank our guest, New York Lieutenant Governor and gubernatorial candidate Antonio Delgado, for joining us on today. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, we will spotlight the impact of Trump's big, beautiful bill is having on Medicaid and healthcare. I'm Angelo Pinto, and this is Let It Rip. Welcome back to Let It Rip. I'm Angelo Pinto. What has been quietly hovering under the radar has been the fallout from Trump's healthcare funding cuts, in which many cities face tough budget decisions. Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act, signed on July 4th, 2025, is expected to cause nearly 12 million people to lose Medicaid and another 5 million to lose private healthcare insurance by 2034. The Medicaid cuts alone are estimated to be close to $1 trillion over 10 years. Hospitals are retrenching ahead of the devastating reality. we must sound the alarm on this crisis. Here to discuss is the chair of hospitals for New York City Council, Mercedes Narcisse. Welcome.
I am so happy to be here with you, and thank you for the invitation. As a registered nurse for many decades, we know those cuts gonna kill us because most of the vulnerable folks, I have care for folks in the hospital, and knowing that the cuts are coming, so many gonna lose their insurances. It is a scary time. And if you're looking at the budget for the state, we're really short of over $13 billion. And now for $8 billion additional that we don't even know what we're doing for the $13 billion we're in the gap. So New York State and New York City, we're in trouble. We, as the chair for hospital, we're talking about $773 million already that we're not gonna have, all those things. And the managed care organization, the tax rate we used to have, about $1.6 billion annually, is gone. All those folks gonna lose their insurances. We're talking about in New York City, over 165,000 people gonna be without insurance. That's a lot of folks.
What do we do in this moment to push back against that? Because to your point, it's a state of emergency and a public health crisis is looming. How do we respond? Can we push back to prevent this from exploding across the state?
Yes, it's to collaborate together and fight for the folks that are actually making the decisions, because it's unfair, because we cannot cut our way to health. If we keep on cutting, and what happened to preventive care? We saying all the time, preventive care is the way to go. Now, we have folks losing SNAP benefit, which is part of your health, because that's basic needs of a body for food, right? And we have a lot of folks that not gonna have like specialty care. For instance, in the H&H hospital, they will not be able to afford it, and only preventive care, that we can do is just primary care. It's only so much we can do. So we need to plan. If we fail to plan this, our planning that we're gonna call is gonna be failed.
What would you like to see your colleagues, other elected officials do in this moment to begin to get in front? As you mentioned, preventative care, can we do something to prevent this onslaught and this attack, this cutting around healthcare in this moment, and in additionally really bolster it so we don't face this kind of attack again in the future?
For me, as a registered nurse, like I said, it can be penny wise, dollar foolish. Because if we don't do preventive care, what happened to the folks that we're talking about all the time? The vulnerable folks, the Black and brown communities, that's already we're not doing well when it comes to healthcare, right? So now we're closing our hospital, the hospitals in our most vulnerable areas of New York City. As a nurse, I can tell you, if you don't have hospital, you saw what happened during the height of the pandemic. So now, more than ever, we need to fight back. We need to plan. We need to collaborate together from the city level, state level, and our friends on the federal level.
Of course, we talk about the healthcare system, but in many communities, you also see things like food deserts, which exacerbate some of the health challenges. How do we respond to that? And what have you done in your tenure to kind of respond to that? Because as healthcare is rolled back, those communities oftentimes are the most vulnerable because they're in a health desert. The health may not have been up to par to begin with. How do we pay attention to all the health components moving in our community to respond as well?
We have to make the country better than we receive it. I'm a person that migrated from here, and I love New York City. Every day that I get up, I want to make that city better from the generation to come. So I hope that's the same idea that I feel like we all should be in. That's my own personal opinion. The president should remember this country belongs to all of us, and we need to put together to collaborate to fix the problem that we're dealing with.
Awesome conversation. Thank you for your time and for the discussion around this emerging emergency issue around the health, which, as you said, affects all of us.
All of us.
And we'll be paying attention to this. I would like to thank our guest, New York City Council member Mercedes Narcisse. And as promised, we will stay on top of all of these topics we covered as the fight ramps up to silence media or to push them further to the right. I say, stay strong, and we are with you. I'm Angelo Pinto, and this is Let It Rip.